Okay, let's talk about the modulation section, as it is labeled, or the low frequency oscillator. Low frequency oscillator is down here, and it's got a number of functions that we don't typically see on low frequency oscillators these days, but like the speed, how rare is that? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's talk about several things. First and foremost, the LFO is normal. It is hardwired to several functions. Number one, we have a knob here marked cutoff. So the LFO is going to send a sine wave normal connection to the cutoff of the filter from this knob. So let's listen to it. We can hear it. It's not insanely overt. It's kind of reasonable. If by some chance you want more than that, you can always patch the sine wave output and connect it to the external CV. First, let's listen to what that sounds like with this off. So, taking this modular approach, you get more you get more low frequency oscillation affecting the filter cutoff point. So that's a desirable thing. And let's see what happens if we turn this up while it's also patched. Doesn't sound like a whole lot. Maybe a tiny bit more. All right, so you can do that. So you have two options. You can either patch it or just go for the easy connection with the knob that is already patched there. Now you might say, well, Mark, I hear the sine wave, but what about a square wave? Again, if you want the square wave modulation to affect the filter cutoff, you're going to have to patch it yourself. Oh, listen to that. If I turn the external input down, we can actually hear both things happening at once. But the more I turn up the external, the more the square wave takes over. Oh, that's a very nice effect. I'm glad I figured that out. Yeah, that is very nice. Cool. Let's do that with the sine wave. Okay. That's the knob connection, the normal connection all the way up. Then we'll turn up the external connection we've made. Oh, it just increases it because it's the same shape. All right. Well, that's still cool. Also, you'll probably remember from our oscillator videos that if we have the oscillator set to square wave, we can introduce pulse width modulation to the oscillators, all three of the oscillators, by turning up the pulse width modulation knob. And I think that if we wanted to, let's see if this is true, we could get more pulse width modulation by routing the sine wave output up to the pulse width modulation input. Yeah, it's a much greater amount, so it's pushing us up to what I suspect is a 100% duty cycle, which is silence, which can be a valuable effect. But yeah, I've actually turned the pulse width down to what should be around 50%, but doesn't sound exactly like 50%. And then we can get a really broad pulse width modulation by turning this input all the way up, pulse width all the way down, and having the output coming out of the sine wave of the LFO. Keep in mind that when the pulse width modulation knob is turned up, it affects all of the oscillators the same way. The differences you hear are due to tuning differences in the two oscillators that are playing right now. The pulse width modulation does not affect the square wave that is the sub-oscillator, just so you know. But anyway, so that is our pulse width modulation normal connection to the oscillators. It's hard when you're demonstrating this synthesizer not to be carried away listening to the great tone. Okay, let's keep talking about functionality, shall we? Mark. Okay. Let us, for a moment, have a listen to the speed knob so we can hear exactly what kind of frequency we have going on with the speed. I've connected it to the pitch input of oscillator 1, so we're going to get kind of a siren as our measurement of speed. The pitch knob, the pitch input amount control on the oscillators has a fairly wide range. Let's get this as slow as it can go. That's pretty slow. Let's speed it up. And yes, it goes into the audio range. Not very far, but good enough to get some of that nice buzzy audio range sort of modulation. Just kind of a weird effect, I'm sorry, but I had to hear it. Okay, so the LFO speed goes into the audio range, which is very desirable. And that leaves us with the fade-in knob, which some synths used to have, and it is a really nice thing when you want to have like a nice vibrato come in, for example. That's what I'm going to demonstrate. Let's have a listen. Okay, I have the... let's make it a vibrato and not... kind of a horror movie vibrato, but still. Okay, so we have that vibrato set. We have the sine wave output patched to the pitch input on oscillator 1. Now I'm going to turn up the fade in. It gradually does fade in. It's not just suddenly on after a certain period of time. It fades in after a certain period of time. Okay, let's do a test here. I'm going to see if the fade in works in tandem with, say, the cutoff modulation LFO effect. And the answer is yes. And I'm assuming that's also going to be true for the pulse width modulation effect. Let's put this these both on squares. And turn that down. And you can see when it comes in, because with the fade in on, the light goes blank until it comes in. Goes blank. The light goes out until it fades in. And there you can hear the pulse width modulation kick in. So yes, and let's not forget that we have 2 sine wave outputs and 2 square wave outputs that you could direct in a number of places here on the synth itself independently, or you could direct outward to your modular gear if you'd like. So that is basically LFO1 on the Fusebox. But let's also keep in mind that VCO3 can be used as an LFO. So you have actually 2 LFOs possible if you want to sacrifice VCO3 to being an LFO. All right.